Drafting in FFPC's $125 Best Ball Tournament from the 104, a different starting spot. That's what we'll be talking about today on Stealing Bananas at Ben Gretch. You can find my newsletter at Yards Per Gretch. With me, as always, you can find my newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. My Twitter handle at Yards Per Gretch. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work at RotoViz. And Shawn, we have a top 5 draft slot. It's an interesting one. 4. I don't really have a strong preference on 4. I think my immediate lean is, look, you can get Chase at 6 and 7 sometimes. So maybe to not take Chase, not necessarily because I don't want him, but just to sort of balance out exposures a little bit. It'd be fun to get a Jefferson team going or a Cup team, or if they both go, certainly a McCaffrey or Taylor team. But we're going to get a pick here in the early part of the draft, which is new for us.
We are. This is going to be very, very exciting. You have done what you needed to do to get rid of the curse. So we're going to have to find out what Ben has been doing in his off hours. The curse is gone. We have a top 5 selection. Ben, you have also released your new betting service. We got 15 seconds before the draft starts, but give us just a quick little preview here of what subscribers are going to get.
Sure, yeah. It's called Stealing Lines. It's in partnership with Dalton Cates, who's incredibly sharp, up-and-comer, who has been hitting on some awesome prop bets over the last year, did incredibly well. I've been talking to him since the offseason, did incredibly well in the combine, incredibly well during the draft. Had some awesome long shot bets late last year, like Rashad Penny 80-1 to lead the week in rushing yards in a week where Penny went on to hit that. So he's a very sharp guy. He's going to help me with a lot of props. We're going to be doing some, season-long futures and stuff during the season, doing normal bets, all those sorts of things. Very excited about that project. You can find it at stealinglines.substack.com if you want to subscribe. But Shawn, the first 3 picks went off quick. Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp. We do have our Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase decision.
We do, and I'm very open to going with either of these guys. Justin Jefferson could be the Cooper Kupp in their offense this year, but with even more talent, if that is possible, which, again, I don't know if that's a fair thing to say after what Kupp did last year. My only question for you would be, do we want to get as much Chase exposure as we possibly can, and does it concern you at all in this particular tournament that their Week 16 and Week 17 games, Green Bay and New England, maybe not as easy to play back, and at the same time, that I do care about that element, but maybe I don't give it quite as high a priority as some other people. We're now down to 10 seconds.
I don't have a lot of Jefferson, so everything you just said makes sense, but I'm definitely, if you're leaving it to me, I'm definitely wanting to get some Jefferson teams built. I have a lot of Chase. I like the idea of just trying to get as much possible Chase, but I also don't know if I've drafted Jefferson at all yet, frankly. And, I'm not doing a ton of drafts. Some listeners will know I can't do underdog drafts where I live, so I haven't been doing an absolute ton, but I feel like I haven't wound up in like this 4th slot a lot. I've got quite a few Chase teams. Just got Chase on the first main event team of the year. So anyway, excited to take Chase or Jefferson. We did take Jefferson. Diggs goes 5. Najee Harris goes 6. This is part of why I've been winding up with plenty of Chases. Some people just aren't that excited. Eckler goes 7. Chase is sitting there at 108. I know we both think this is a mistake.
Then this would have been the draft to get the 8th pick.
That's right.
Just to fill listeners in a little bit more, if you're interested in this tournament, this year they have doubled the grand prize. So it's at $200,000. You get $50,000 for second. Obviously, you get some cash for winning or advancing out of your league. You advance to week 15, you advance to week 16, you advance to week 17. This was the tournament that Colin Blair and I had so much fun in last year with Connor. And if you've been reading Connor, you know that he is doing just incredible work up on the site in terms of all kinds of best ball content right now. Make sure you check that out. Because the first 3 picks did go quickly, Ben, you had to sort of rush through your promo there, but I just wanted to say I'm very excited for Stealing Lines, and I think people should definitely check that out. At least consider it if you're interested in prop bets. It's something that you don't want to miss. The next kind of curveball that we got here is Mark Andrews at the 109. You were telling me before we started, because the thing that we're hoping for, and since we're doing the show as the draft is going, but we're not streaming the draft live, so we can mention that we're desperately hoping that Kyle Pitts would come back to us. In the last week, he has an ADP of 208, which would fall one slot short, obviously. But you were saying that you have Travis Kelce in your top tier at tight end, and then Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts very, very close together at number 2. I was saying that I probably very ridiculously moved Kyle Pitts up to number 6 overall in this tight end premium format. I do have him above Kelce. I've had those guys at 6 and 7. You were mentioning on our auction show when we were talking about projecting the Chiefs, and you said that you had some nervousness about Juju Smith-Schuster because of how you went through your projecting, I think, a very legitimate number of targets for Marquez Valdes-Scantling. You're projecting a very legitimate number of targets for Skyy Moore, and I think that he could even do more than that. I was joking with you that you need to decrease your targets for Mecole Hardman and maybe juice the rushing attempts a little bit. Maybe those will all be just of the 1-inch pass variety, kind of that hybrid handoff target where obviously in PPR we prefer it to actually just be a target. My thought there would be that with Kelce having the tiniest downtick last year, he did go through a stretch where he didn't play particularly well before he picked it up in the reality playoffs, especially, that maybe those guys are actually going to put a little bit of pressure on him. I'm not in any way projecting some big collapse, or I wouldn't have him at number 7 overall, but I do think that it pulls Kelce and Pitts pretty close together. How surprised are you that Mark Andrews, though, is the first tight end off the board?
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm getting through my rankings, my first run of rankings. Finally, I think I've been talking about this for months. I had Kelce in his own tier. I had Pitts over Andrews as the second tier. I am getting a little more excited about Andrews as well after going through the projection process. No Marquise Brown there. Bateman actually didn't have an incredible rookie year. I'm excited about him potentially taking the step forward, but they don't have a lot of other options. Every day that goes by, they don't add, one of these free agents like Julio, like I thought maybe they would. I'm thinking more and more that even if they throw less, Andrews is going to be, the guy for the most part. So I do like Pitts over Andrews. I still have Kelce in his own tier because I think Kelce is also going to be just incredibly heavily leaned on. You talked about the downtick in the middle of last year. He did have a stinger. It's kind of banged up. I remember writing about it in Stealing Signals and having a couple sharper people than me reach out and let me know that was the case. Shout out to Bill Barnwell over at ESPN, who was one of the people who I remember messaged me and said, hey, it might be more about the stinger. And I did a little research in that, realized that I probably agreed. And then to see the way that he picked up down the stretch and in the playoffs had 299 yards across 3 games, averaged 7.7 catches per game, I think it was, 9 targets a game, scored 3 touchdowns in the playoffs. We saw the normal Kelce. So I'm looking at it like there wasn't really an age decline last year, even though some of the numbers might suggest there was. If you look at his regular season numbers, he doesn't look as great as he had in past years. I really think it was the injury for that stretch, considering how well he played late in a long season where he was hurt. They play 3 playoff games. He plays 20 games, I believe, unless he missed a game or 2 in there. But still had that juice late. And I think with the depth of the passing game that we talked about, that we're somewhat optimistic about the passing game now, having multiple options. I mean, he's always been a guy that even as teams have to key on Tyreek, they're still keying on Kelce. It might actually be harder now. I mean, there's 2 ways to look at that, certainly. So I really do still like Kelce, but I can't let you be higher than me on Pitts. You told me you were that high. We've been talking a little bit about it. I went back and looked up our tight end show from early June, and I was pretty excited about him then before I knew how excited you were. So I'm going to have to go back and put Pitts as maybe the number 5 overall player ahead of Chase just to get ahead of you, I think.
Well, Ben, what has happened here is that there were a lot of somewhat surprise selections. We'll go through this in a second once we're back off the clock. But we got to within one pick, and my excitement knew no bounds, even as you were finishing up there, because we were guaranteed to get either Saquon Barkley or Kyle Pitts. Barkley did go. Kyle Pitts is here. You just talked about him. I was mentioning we wanted him. How awesome is it to be able to get Justin Jefferson and Pitts on the same team?
Yeah, it's an incredible start. That first main event I mentioned where it started with Chase Pitts. I think that was just an incredible start to that main. I'm really excited to now have a Jefferson Pitts version. I think getting one of these elite receivers and then backing it up with Pitts is year 2 wide receiver breakout that gets tight end eligibility and still gets 1.5 points per reception. I mean, that's what he is, right? A 20-year-old last year for the first 5 or 6 games, turning 21, still has a 1,000-yard season, incredibly young, looks like a year 2 breakout that we'd want to target. And yet in the tight end premium format where he, gets to check our tight end box and gets the 1.5, we're still getting him in the late second. He feels like a late first or a mid first. In your case, the last guy in the first half of the first. So it's an incredible start.
And just to fill the listeners in on a few of those players who did go early, Breece Hall has been just rocketing up boards. He was the 204 in this draft. We've been encouraging you to select him every time you possibly can before he gets this expensive. I don't think that he's going to sit at the 204 necessarily, but that was something that we did see on the horizon. T. Higgins goes at the 205. So the Chase Higgins stack has started, and that will probably make Joe Burrow a little bit less expensive for that drafter later on, maybe balance out the Higgins reach a little bit. But, I never think that Higgins is a reach anywhere. I mean, you can draft him ahead of Jamar Chase if you want. I mean, that'd probably be the only way that you could possibly reach on T. Higgins. Javonte Williams goes at the 206. So we have an Eckler Williams start from that point. Yeah, then with 3 picks to go, we had Lamb, Barkley, and Pitts all available. We knew we would get one of those 3 guys. We've mentioned our skepticism about Lamb, but I mean, if you're going to get him in the mid to back half of the second round, I think you've got to be pretty excited there. What are you thinking here as Mike Evans and Tyreek Hill go off the board? We're just on the clock with Nick Chubb going. The other little bit surprised was that James Conner went at the 210 and left Leonard Fournette. Not our guy necessarily here. Fournette, Waller, ETN. We could get our one sort of early running back with ETN. We could continue with your guy, A.J. Brown.
That's where I tend to lean here. I think it is a pretty big tier break at receiver after Brown. Keenan Allen and Michael Pittman still on the board to me. They're on the other side of that tier break. I don't see a lot different between Brown and CeeDee Lamb, who goes in the early second, personally. At the same time, ETN's been rising. I've not been getting as much of him lately at these prices. He was a really fun pick in the 5th or 4th. Those are the 2 that would stand out to me.
Okay, so we know that we have to do A.J. Brown for our first 125 FFPC Best Ball Tournament team together. Then there are a couple of guys that I have some interest in that we've talked about as potential dead zone backs who might come back around in either a Cam Akers or a J.K. Dobbins. We can also just play pure zero RB here. We know that this works very well in this format, especially works very well if you get that early tight end and if your first round pick is actually a star wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. I think that is one of the keys. One of the things that I saw in a 125 draft, or apologize, in one of the best ball drafts that I did in the last week was that Michael Pittman and Mike Williams went at the 2-3 turn. And this isn't a huge criticism of those players. I mean, those are solid players, but in many ways that's shocking to me because you're talking about the guys who were like wide receiver 21 and wide receiver 25 last year on a point per game basis. And I don't know that there's as much secondary breakout potential with those players as maybe people are thinking. I mean, they're entering their age 25 and age 28 seasons. I mean, Pittman obviously still young from an experience perspective, but there's probably a different route that you can take. And if you do get a secondary breakout, which is possible, maybe especially for Pittman, from an experience perspective, hopefully from Williams, we'll be able to see him show off what he did in the first half of last year with Justin Herbert, but anything that they do at that point is completely priced in if you're taking him at the 2-3 turn.
But we are getting towards the end of the third. We see Ezekiel Elliott go. Some very interesting picks. This draft out of the 9 slot has now started. Mark Andrews, Breece Hall, Ezekiel Elliott, really kind of getting their guys. We see Michael Pittman go to the Chase Higgins team. That's another 0 RB team starting. No surprise right after Brown went off the board. Fournette and ETN went back to back. The draft out of the 7 holes building sort of an anti-fragile, or we'll see, hyper-fragile with Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara to start. An interesting board so far. We also see Josh Allen now go off in the 3rd round.
It is, and I love to see this. I love to see drafts where individual managers don't feel completely tied to ADP. We have drafters going out there and getting the players that they want. Obviously, one of the reasons you like it is that sometimes that'll create a value for you later on in the draft, but it's good to see some creativity as drafters are going through. You're going to get a little bit of a different build, maybe have some early players, especially early on, where teams are going to be a little bit more similar. You're going to have some differentiation there. And just if you have your rankings in a certain spot, you want to get your guy. If you're in the 9-10 hole and someone is going to be in a different part of the draft board, I mean, you don't want to be constantly reaching throughout the draft. One of the things that we have mentioned on the show is this idea of the value of drafting quite a bit is that you don't have to feel as much pressure to get your guys. You can get sort of those double values. And that's where the strength of being able to pick the right players, but also get them at a discount to ADP can really be unlocked. But this has been a fun draft to start. Darren Waller actually does go a little bit later than he has been, which creates an interesting situation for the team out of 11 that has Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, then Darren Waller, and Justin Herbert. One of the things that we do know is that if you wait on wide receivers in a double flex league where you have full PPR, it's very, very difficult to catch up. At the same time, it'll be fun to see what that team does later. Ben, I think in a lot of ways this is playing out nicely for us because we do see a fairly running back heavy tilt to the draft in the early going.
Yeah, Keenan Allen finally goes at 403. Ever since we took A.J. Brown, Michael Pittman was the only wide receiver selection. And a reminder to anyone listening to the pod, you can always go to YouTube, go to the RotoViz channel, subscribe if you don't mind. That won't give you any unwanted notifications or anything unless you turn alerts on. But you can go to the YouTube RotoViz channel, and whether you subscribe or not, you can view the video of this draft. You can follow along with the board in video form. So that's always a fun way to engage with these drafts as well. Marquise Brown goes 404. DJ Moore is still sitting there at 405. He's been going in the middle of the 3rd round. You have moved him to the top of the queue. It sounds like I'm not going to have to talk you into it.
Then if DJ Moore makes it to the 409,
he did.
Do you stop everything else and just hold a Friday afternoon party?
Yes, that would have been it. Justin Jefferson, Kyle Pitts, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore. You can talk about not having running backs. I'm going to talk about how good those players are on the same roster. He goes to that drafter at 8 that started Chase Higgins, Pittman, very much a 0 RB build there with 4 straight receivers. Like what that drafter's doing with what the draft is giving them, we probably would have had a somewhat similar draft out of the 8 spot. Probably would have went Chase Pitts, right? And then who knows what we're done in the 3rd round. Maybe I would have talked to him into more in the 3rd round, so we wouldn't have got him in the 4th round. But Pittman Moore, that's a very nice start. We are now 3 picks away. You have the queue loaded up with some of these sliding wide receiver values. You also talked about the running backs into the dead zone you're interested in. What are you thinking right now?
Well, Mike Williams is not someone I like at the 2-3 turn, but you get him back here at 409. I think you have to look at that very, very differently. He's been going in this format in the last week. He's been going at 312, which still is a little bit above where I prefer to get him. But if he makes it one more pick, I mean, Cortland Sutton goes off the board now. He did go at the 408. So going through here, and one of the things that I do like is this idea of taking Jaylen Waddle and having that kind of be the play with the Dolphins. It's probably not 50-50 that he outscores Tyreek Hill, but I think it's much, much closer than their ADPs indicate. You do have that potential for him to take a big step forward this year off of what was one of the best rookie seasons that we've seen, at least from a generating targets perspective. We know he has that speed that is almost in Hill territory. The other name here that I do have up is J.K. Dobbins. We could try and get him through in the 5th round.
I think we hope to sneak him through to the 5th. I really like Waddle after ADP here. We have had a little mini receiver run here, 6 in a row go. So we didn't really get to realize the, this room going away from running backs all through the 3rd. Again, this is turning into a draft where if we would have had the final 3rd slots, if we would have been at 12 or at 11, we could have really benefited from some of these runs. But Keenan Allen, Marquise Brown, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams all go. When those names go off, I think Waddle is – I have Waddle behind Williams, I think. But I do think he's ahead of the next group of receivers. It's sort of like a little transition tier. I definitely want Waddle, and I'm still comfortable taking Waddle. And in a particularly receiver-heavy draft, taking him at the 3-4 turn. So to get him at 409 is very nice. The drafters behind us, 2 of them had started with 2 running backs in their first 3 picks. They go Dalton Schultz and Deontay Johnson. I was kind of hoping that would be the case. We also see Allen Robinson now go at the turn to the Jonathan Taylor drafter, who had backed it up with 2 receivers. He goes receiver. So this was the hope that Dobbins might circle around. I knew you'd be excited about Dobbins. I'm thinking we have a shot at him at this point.
And the drafter out of the 1st slot who gets – obviously, the great Jonathan Taylor now has Debo, Mike Evans, Allen Robinson, Gabriel Davis, a fun team and a very good construction, even if you're mildly skeptical about Allen Robinson. I don't think you can quibble too much there.
And we got Dobbins through. David Montgomery was the only running back to go in those 6 picks. Dobbins at the top of the queue. They're just the top guy on the board is the guy that we want to take.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. We have Dobbins in terms of ADP in the last week is actually a couple spots below this. There's still a lot of debate about his health. Those questions will start to be answered in the near future. Then we could still go even a more hardcore 0 RB with DK Metcalf or Rashad Bateman, but I do feel pretty good about Dobbins giving us the league winning upside that really you should have to pay several rounds higher to get.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Dobbins here. It is a sort of a dead zone-y type back. At the same time, he is sort of that profile of younger player that we haven't really seen the ceiling from. You also have the injury. I mean, for people who aren't 100%, remembering what's happened in Dobbins' career so far, he was a rookie in 2020, was in sort of a rotation, kind of took over the backfield to a decent degree down the stretch and was very good, and then missed all of 2021. All we've really seen is his rookie season. Obviously, the injury is important, but when we talk about where he's at, does he make sense as a dead zone back? Yeah, he's in year 3, but he didn't play it all in year 2. Still think he fits his profile of young player that we don't necessarily know how good he is. Again, injury caveat is a big one, but assuming that he hasn't lost a lot of his burst and everything, what he did late in year 1 was suggesting that he was an interesting upside play in year 2. It's not necessarily a great offense for, running back receptions. It is good for running back, rush efficiency because of Lamar Jackson and how teams have to still defend the edge, and they, are going to have to give up a little bit more in the inside running game, on some of those read options, some of those types of handoffs. I mean, I think, we're certainly making a bet on health, but I think it made a lot of sense in part because the entire 4th round after Cam Akers went away from the running back position, and the first couple picks of the 5th round as well. David Montgomery went right before us, but, it was a little bit less receiver heavy to start, so maybe that was just balancing it. But anytime you get into a draft where the position you are considering going to has not really been hit much in the previous round at all, it's maybe a good indication that it's a decent pocket to take a stab from a price perspective. Interestingly, the next 5 picks were all non-running backs, so no one else seems to agree with this theory. It goes DK Metcalf, Jerry Jeudy, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I still really like where we're at.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, but I think that the flip side of what kind of you're talking about there is that Montgomery and Dobbins, you could argue, are the two really clear values in the midst of this massive wide receiver run that is taking place. The fact that there haven't been more running backs selected after that, and perhaps that indicates that some other drafters agree with us that there's a huge drop off once Dobbins is gone. At the same time, we know that this is obviously an area where you want to hammer wide receiver. The last two picks now, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Rashad Bateman, both guys that we like and think should obviously be drafted at least that high. It was interesting to see Patrick Mahomes go to a team that had started running back. If you're going to go hyper fragile, I do think that there is a case to be made for sort of prioritizing the last of the QBs in the window, as opposed to burning a pick there that really probably you need at wide receiver, especially since, Amon-Ra and Rashad Bateman, I think you could argue that there's actually a pretty decent tier break after them. So you could be on the front side of that. It was also interesting to see the Chase Higgins drafter not risk Joe Burrow following back through him. He makes it to 6'10", and that's in a situation where you don't necessarily, you haven't kind of boxed out the other drafters by having taken already the two interesting guys to stack him with there. Again, because kind of the last two really fun wide receivers were at that spot. Maybe you could play it differently, but
I was curious to see how. I mean, obviously that drafter was going to be interested in Burrow, but at 508, it was an aggressive move to make sure to get Burrow. We see the number 12 drafter take Kyler as well on Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, George Kittle, Cam Akers start. Not quite the hyperfragile one you talked about, but is going to be thin at receiver. I don't mind that pick at 512 necessarily, but yeah, we have a couple drafters that are seeming to really devalue the wide receiver position here. Probably going to try to hit it with volume late. It makes me much more excited about, potentially getting in the drafter after taking Murray takes Josh Jacobs at that turn. Yeah, not a pick I'm a fan of, but I'm hoping we'll have some interesting receivers to choose from as it gets back to us. We're also looking at a situation where Lamar Jackson is still there, and 5 of the drafters on this side of the room have taken quarterbacks, including the one who took Bateman. The Mark Andrews drafter does not yet have a quarterback. Would not surprise me if they took Jackson here in a couple of picks. But to get Dobbins with Jackson would be, I think, pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, and we would have so much of that covered. I don't think that those guys are players that you need to worry too much about cannibalizing each other either, especially from a full season perspective. We want to win the league first. We want to get there to week 17. One of the things in the news just really in the last 24 hours, I mean, it's been in the news all off season, but RG3 suggesting that the Ravens will be much more run heavy again this season, and just more notes about how the Ravens, as a very run-heavy team, were also one of the highest-scoring teams in football, which isn't necessarily the way that goes. When we think about it from that perspective, you mentioned J.K. Dobbins and how good he was. I just put out an article about how to find this year's James Conner using a lot of the cool stats that are in our Advanced Stats Explorer from Sports Info Solutions. Tried to make sure it dived into a handful of different ones as opposed to looking at the same thing. I'm going to have that was a veteran-oriented article. I have a youth-oriented article here in another week or 2 weeks. And basically, suffice it to say that almost no one looks as good as J.K. Dobbins did on the touches that he did get as a rookie. I expect him to get more, because when you're talking about a Jamal Charles type of player within that offense, I do think the sky's the limit, even when you eliminate some of those receptions. Ben, the Mark Andrews drafter, selected Miles Sanders. We are now 1 pick away from being able to get Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, that would be a pretty incredible value, helped along by Burrow going in the 5th. And we are going to get him as Devonta Smith goes before us. Wide receiver thinning out pretty quickly. We do have 3 pretty strong top-end receivers. The pick's Jackson for me. I don't know. Is there any case you can make elsewhere?
Well, TJ Hawkinson has also fallen, and I think that the double elite tight end build is extremely dynamic in this format. So he would be a strong possibility. He's even more discounted than Jackson is, but I mean, both of those picks are so much fun. And we do already have a tight end.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think I would be in game for that if Jackson wasn't on the board. But to get Jackson at this point as the QB6, the QBs tend to go a little higher in best ball to get a real elite upside. I have Jackson as my QB2 after Josh Allen. I don't know where you're at. Russell Wilson goes right behind the Jackson pick. So none of the drafters behind us had a QB. One does have a tight end, Dalton Schultz. Possibility that Hawkinson swings back. I did not think that Jackson would make it back, but Hawkinson actually does go to the drafter in the 2 slot. But where are you? I mean, I know you love the rushing quarterbacks. You've got to be sort of where I am. I'm not sure if we've talked about this, but I feel like Kyler and Lamar are the 2 and the 3, and it is very weird to see Mahomes and Herbert go ahead of them so frequently.
It really is. The Arizona Cardinals offense has been one as well that we've encouraged people to draft as much of as possible because I think they're going to get more expensive. I don't know if all the weirdness at the beginning of the offseason has been a big factor in the price for Murray and then the price for his pieces. I don't feel like it should have been, although you never know. I mean, sometimes when some of this off the field and perhaps you have questions about the football character for a player, how committed are they to the team? How committed are they to their own personal improvement? I mean, those things do matter, but they're also pretty difficult for people who aren't actually on the inside to be able to tell. He obviously gets the big contract in the last several days. I think that they will all start to rise now. So he's a good pick. I mean, I think that you can put them right there with Josh Allen. Maybe Lamar Jackson has a little bit better chance to stay healthy, even though he didn't last year. I think that my concern with them would be just that maybe their injury risk damages their chances to actually make it all the way through, which you are going to need compared to Herbert and Mahomes. But if they're healthy, they're going to outscore them.
Yep, I agree with you there. We're back on the clock. I like Drake London. You have Tony Pollard also in the queue. I could get there. He's the 3rd running back available. We still have Elijah Mitchell and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the, covering him. We probably won't see Pollard come back. Almost certainly won't.
Are there any other receivers that you like here? I mean, one of the things is whether or not we do want him with Pitts. I don't have a problem with that. I think that both of those guys are going to be high target share players within that offense. I don't think there's anybody else going to be siphoning anything that matters. I think that the Falcons can score more points. I think he's the easy value here. I don't have another receiver actually for quite a long while, right. So I would probably lean to
let's take London because we're running down the clock here. I don't love taking him with Pitts, but this is, I think, a unique situation for a couple reasons. One, like you said, there are not a lot of other interesting receivers here. Devonta Smith has gone. Elijah Moore has gone. Several other upside younger receivers in the 5-6 range have already gone. We're here at 704 looking at London and then sort of just looking down all the way to like Treylon Burks, after Russell Gage and Adam Thielen and Hunter Renfrow and DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk and Alan Lazard. And none of those guys are guys that I really want to be taking. So it's a pretty big gap in that regard. And then secondly, it is best ball. I think in managed, especially when you're taking Pitts, you're really making a bet that he's such a massive tight end. I don't know that I like to pair London with him in that scenario. I don't really mind pairing 2 players from the same passing game, especially when it's a good passing game. This is one that we don't know how good it will be. But in the unique case of a tight end receiver one, on a bet like Pitts, the bet is, we certainly want the Pitts side to win out because he's the tight end and we're going to have more depth at receiver. Having said that, in best ball, I'm not as concerned. It's just one of those elements where obviously we're going to be playing both of their good games when they occur. I still think London has a good season regardless. So factoring in both those elements, both the lack of reasonable alternatives and that this is best ball and not redraft, I'm very comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think this is the situation too where if at any point Kyle Pitts is so good that defenses have to scheme to take him away, it's going to really free up Drake London. I think the presence of both players will help the other one out. It also gives us the potential for a really late quarterback play, not necessarily the direction that we're leaning toward or looking to go, but something that is maybe a very outside type of scenario. The other thing here with the Falcons is that even though the rushing ability of Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder does factor in when you're considering them as late round picks in any sort of fantasy format, they're not expected to run in the same way that
Lamar,
a Murray or a Jackson or a Trey Lance is
or a
projected to run.
Hurts. Yeah.
So we're not necessarily losing a huge chunk of targets from the offense. And I do think that Arthur Smith will be more aggressive this season. I guess I just think the Falcons are going to be a little bit ahead of where the consensus is. Maybe it's just too much enthusiasm about Drake London, but I think especially as we look toward the end of the season, people are going to be looking back in the same way they were with Jaylen Waddle last year and trying to figure out why he was available in the 7th round.
Yeah, I really like that call. I mean, I feel that way about all of the rookie receivers. And we're going to be in that pocket, I think, as we come back around at 809. We're going to be looking at maybe Treylon Burks or now Chris Olave going ahead of Skyy Moore. I still don't understand Garrett Wilson's price. We're kind of out of range at tight end. Hawkinson Goddard also went on that turn where we passed on Hawkinson. They went to the same manager in the 2 slot. And now that we went London, Freiermuth, and Dawson Knox have gone in the later part of the 7th round. Best available tight ends are Zach Ertz, Cole Kmet, Irv Smith. Not picks that I necessarily want to be making. Comfortable with Kmet, but not that I want to be making over some of these upside receivers. Best available running backs does include a guy that you wrote about recently. I got a text message about it that it created quite the chuckle from my brother. Actually was reading it, where you put a little footnote in to say all of the running backs who had done what Singletary had done from an elusive rating perspective. Singletary done it for 3 straight years in at least 2 of the last 3 years. Then when you clicked on the footnote, it said none. Very good use of the footnotes from you there. I got a kick out of that whole article. That was fantastic, Shawn. Singletary would be pretty interesting. Still sitting there. We see Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Damian Harris go off the board. Singletary is the top running back. We're still 5 slots away. Trey Lance also there, who you've added to the queue. A Lamar Jackson, Trey Lance quarterback room. Now, that would be fun. That would have floor, and that would have ceiling.
Yeah, I'm starting to get pretty excited about the options for coming back. I mean, I think that they're going to all go right in this little spot before us. Singletary does go there. One of the things about having Pitts in London is that, I mean, you're looking at that Cardinals game in week 17, and then DeAndre Hopkins is going to be available for that game unless he comes back and hurts himself. He's not someone I've drafted a lot. I did take him on a hyper fragile team where I wanted to have week 17 upside. He also does go. So
he does go.
We do lose those guys. That's not surprising. They do have earlier ADPs than our slot. And now
Rondale Moore becomes a priority pick. We got to get some Arizona. Trey McBride becomes a priority pick. I know you are very excited about taking him at any point you can. I think on our last show you said you have thrown away all pretense and are happy to take him any chance you get on every single team. We're back up. You have Trey Lance at the top of the queue.
Yeah, and I mean, all the formats are a little bit different, Ben, but I think it was my actual other 125 best ball FFPC tournament that I was doing in a slow draft with a lot of the RotoViz folks, and then obviously a lot of other folks as well, where Lance went early 7. I mean, looks like he's going to be an early 7 guy.
Yeah.
You think that he is going to even pay off at early 7?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a no-brainer.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, getting Jackson and Lance is pretty massive. I think he belongs right alongside Hurts, who went 3 picks after our Lamar Jackson selection. We get Lance 2 rounds later. And I just love the combination because they both are going to have such high rush rates, or at least that's the way I'm envisioning it. Certainly Lamar, you kind of know that. Lance, it appears that way. The rushing, we talk about this all the time, but it creates a floor. It also creates the ceiling. When you have a 2 quarterback build and they both have like elite rushing rates, I don't see how we ever get less than 15 points, assuming they're both playing all the games this year. I don't really see how we ever get less than 15 points at QB, fewer than 15 points. And I think we're going to have a lot of 30-point spike games. Obviously, Jackson will be leading that charge probably, but when Lance has some, multi-passing touchdown games, I mean, this is a quarterback room that I think is going to have some real floor, some real ceiling. I was hoping some of these running backs might swing back around. We see Ken Walker, Kareem Hunt, Chase Edmonds, Rashad Penny go back to back at the 8-9 turn. Both the 1 and 2 drafters hitting 2 running backs at the turn. Understandable. There were some good running back options in that group that were available at this point in the draft. Still, I'm glad that we took Lance. Dameon Pierce now goes off the board. 5 straight running backs. What are you seeing?
I feel like you're going to make an argument for Cordero Patterson so we can just be all Falcons.
No, I'm not.
So, Ben, right here, one of the things that I do like about having Jackson and Lance, too, is it does free you up from feeling the pressure to select QB wide receiver combinations. I think that part of it and the flexibility and just the types of unique builds that you can make, that part I like. We are sitting here where it's about Brandon Ayuk's ADP. There were some negative reports on him recently where beat writers saying he does not look like a former first-round pick. We also have guys like Treylon Burks, Skyy Moore, Garrett Wilson, who we probably like more in a vacuum. Which receiver do you want?
I'm comfortable with Ayuk. I haven't taken a lot of him. I like the way that you built into that selection by saying we don't need to stack, but here's the sack target that we should take. But yes, I agree with you that I would prefer Burks, Moore, or Wilson in a vacuum. It's a fun opportunity to get a share of Ayuk because I don't think he's a bad guy to be drafting at his ADP. I just don't get a lot of him simply because he's going in this range with these rookie receivers that I'm taking in every draft. Hopefully one of them comes back around. It does seem to be a room that is not, crazy about the rookies necessarily. We still have Burks, Skyy Moore, Olave, and Garrett Wilson all on the board here in the middle of the 9th. There's a possibility one of them gets back to 10-09. You'd assume probably that would be Garrett Wilson if it does happen.
You would think that, and at the same time, it also feels like Skyy Moore is maybe in the real bottom of the trough for him in terms of where he's going to be. As soon as the Chiefs start practicing, I think that both Moore and MVS will probably rise just because from a weekly perspective, they're going to offer a lot of upside in what I expect to be a high-powered Chiefs passing attack. But then, just once players from teams that are dynamic start getting talked about, it's hard for me to not see them move ahead of some of these other players. And I know that Allen Lazard going 2 rounds earlier probably has less competition for those targets in Green Bay, but I guess I just expect the Chiefs to be a lot more explosive. I like Allen Lazard. We went through the story before about me giving him to you as a rookie pick, and then obviously that didn't work out since he wasn't drafted. But there are a few players in there, like a Lazard, a Kirk, where I guess I think it doesn't probably make sense still where they're going. I'm surprised that we're getting. I mean, we don't have a very early pick from the Saints, but I don't expect the Saints to be that explosive, and I think that they will cannibalize each other. I don't think that Olave should necessarily be going ahead of these other rookie wide receivers either. I think that if you like Olave, you should really look at Jahan Dotson now. I don't know that there's going to be a huge difference in the quarterback play between Jameis Winston and Carson Wentz, even though obviously we're not on Carson Wentz. And Dotson already generating some raves, some similarities in the profile between those two players. Not saying that Dotson is as good, but you do want to take discounts where you can get them. And it's a pretty big discount, right?
Yeah, Dotson is going incredibly late. I've had some conversations about him lately.
Yeah, middle to late round 12. Garrett Wilson, the 10-12 in the last week. So, Ben, hopefully he will come back to us. One of the things here is I think that Treylon Burks has fallen below where he should be. And yet at the same time, as you keep mentioning, given the rough offseason that he's had and given where Garrett Wilson was drafted, I mean, there's a lot of skepticism about Zach Wilson. I'm very skeptical about Zach Wilson, not because I don't want him to succeed or don't think that he has arm talent, but you look at a lot of the metrics and they don't, well, they at least encourage you to remember that there's downside. But even with that being the case, Garrett Wilson's price makes no sense. Elijah Moore at the 701. Yeah, I mean, Elijah Moore was extremely dynamic last season. You do have to consider that. I mean, not every player who's drafted early. I mean, you think about Garrett Wilson and where he's drafted, and it seems like a lock. And then you remember, I mean, Mike Williams now, we're talking about age 28, finally getting excited about him for fantasy in some ways for the first time, or at least the first time after he did not do much when he first came into the NFL. Not all of the top 15 guys succeed, but there are some interesting prices.
Definitely no argument from me there. Olave does go, and Burks has gone. Skyy and Garrett Wilson both still on the board. Those are the only two receivers that have gone since our pick. We got a similar run out here in the 9th to the 3rd. On the way back in the 4th, it was all receivers. I'll be interested to see. And a lot of these teams need to start taking receivers. We're looking at teams that have 2 and 3 receivers now into the 10th round. But we'll keep an eye on that as we have about 6 or 7 more picks until we are on the board. Patterson still sitting there at the top of the queue. If he comes all the way back, maybe you'll get your all Falcons wish. Ramondre Stevenson sitting there second in the queue. I would be very comfortable with him as our RB2. He does go here. 2 picks in a row to drafters that had 3 receivers that were non-receivers. Works for us. We also have MVS in this group coming back. You talked about him. I'm excited about him as well. I think he would be a nice receiver 6. I'm more concerned about our wide receiver 6 right now than our running back 2. Would you say you feel similarly?
Well, I'd like to add good players for both. One of the things that does happen when you take the early tight end.
I was thinking we would just add good receivers and not good running backs.
The 2 relatively early QBs means that we could end up a little bit short on both of these players. But one of the things that jumps out to me, and we are heartbroken because Garrett Wilson goes right ahead of us.
Skyy is still there, Shawn. And he's going to make it to us. Claypool goes off after Wilson. It is a bummer that Wilson went, but we get Skyy at 10:09.
Yeah, so then the other question here, and I think that I know your answer since both teams in between, or all 3 teams in between, already have 4 running backs, which doesn't stop them from drafting a 5th running back. But Ronald Jones is the 10-10 by ADP. We like Skyy better than Rojo?
I think so. In this spot, largely because Patterson is still standing there if we had to take him. I mean, I don't really want to take another Falcon on this roster, but we could. And Rachaad White is right there behind Rojo, and I would be really happy to add Rachaad White as well. But I do agree that Rojo would be the preference. He might also slip. There was a report circulating on Twitter that he might be on the roster bubble. There was somebody who had suggested that in their 53-man write-up. I didn't agree with that. He has an interesting contract. It's a 1-year, $1.5 million contract. $3.5 million is in incentives. One of the things with players who didn't do a lot like Ronald Jones didn't last year, they can be classified as not likely to be earned incentives. And then if they are earned, they will count against the 2023 cap. The Chiefs did this with Juju. We don't have Ronald Jones's specific incentives, but they gave Juju, I think, like $3.5 million on a contract that was reported to be up to $10 million. But the rest of it is all incentives, like $7 million of incentives. And a big chunk of it is really easily gettable because he didn't really play a lot last year. The only way the not likely to be earned tag is classified is based on last year's performance. So for Juju, it's stuff like playing 40% of the snaps, he gets a hit. Catching 30 or 40 balls or something, he gets a hit. And then, it scales up, but a lot of them are very, very reachable. I kind of feel like that probably was the case with Ronald Jones' contract. We don't have the actual confirmed reports, but it would make sense because the Chiefs need that money to then be on the 2023 cap. They're very cap strapped. If that is the case, it's very possible there's sort of a wink nod and, hey, we're putting your contract this way, but we're not going to just throw you to the wolves. At least that's the way that I'm reading it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
The Chiefs need Ronald Jones to be a starter to be a good offense. So I'm just going to assume that part of wisdom prevails. One thing that did happen to us here, Ben, is that in the last round, Gerald Everett and Noah Fant both went off the board. We do need this to be a 3 tight end build. You pull up the roster construction explorer, and you see the win rates go through the roof when you get to 3 tight ends. And obviously we don't want to do it where we're like just picking guys so that we can say that we picked them. But now that Noah Fant went 1 pick ahead of us, unless we want Albert O, who I think probably has more legitimate concerns than Ronald Jones, since he's actually competing with a good player for routes. I mean, they're both going to play. They're both going to score. Albert O is an extremely athletic incumbent. We could go that route here.
The only other pick I don't want to go
Rondale Moore is not going to come back to us
Moore.
Either, so.
Yeah, I'd be comfortable with Rondale Moore as the bring back for the Atlanta stack.
Okay.
Jones or Moore is fine by me.
We'll do Rondale just to see if we can get some extreme slide from Ronald Jones and see if any of these drafters will pivot to taking wide receivers. Unfortunately, the team right after us only had 2. He does take Rachaad White, so he's allowing Rojo to slide. Rojo would have to get past him again in the next round, which, again, I think is something of a pipe dream. Michael Carter goes. Michael Carter is someone I've been encouraging listeners to take when you don't have Breece Hall. And it seems probably weird to say I don't want to prioritize having one of the 2 Jets running backs, since that's not a team we expect to score a lot of points necessarily. But Michael Carter, I think, because Breece Hall projects as such a star, it's easy to forget that Michael Carter had a fantastic rookie season. In many ways, not that dissimilar to what Javonte Williams did, sort of on a per touch basis. I like those smaller guys who run daylight, but Michael Carter broke a lot of tackles. He was very, very good at North Carolina as well. So someone who is a good pick there in the middle of the 11th round. But how do you see these next couple of rounds playing out? What are we kind of hoping for beyond our Rojo dreams?
I really like the Rondale Moore pick because we do have both London and Pitts. You talked about the Week 17 correlation there. Atlanta and Arizona playing each other. We'd like that game to be a little bit more fast-paced and some passing and some scoring. And hopefully by that point, Rondale Moore has turned into Steve Smith, which is inevitable, but will hopefully have happened by that point. Probably not likely that we get Rondale Moore back, but we're sort of past the point. The reason I like the Rondale Moore pick so much is we're now with Tyler Boyd going off the board into a range of wide receiver that we're sort of past the point where you want to be taking receivers, as we talked about on a recent show. So we got to 7 before that point. We just finished up with Ayuk, Skyy Moore, and Rondale Moore. Obviously had the 3 early in Jefferson, AJ Brown, and Waddle. We hit Drake London in the middle there. Some really interesting upside plays behind those 3, big potential target earners at the top. Really like the texture of those 7 receivers. Don't feel like we need to rush to get our 8th, especially after that drop off. Where I'm going with this is if it doesn't make it back, I do really like the pocket of running backs I expect to be there. Right after him in ADP, we have Nyheim Hines. Not thrilled about him necessarily. We have Alexander Madison, not necessarily a huge target, but somebody I'd be comfortable taking. Then Isaiah Spiller, Darrell Henderson, Kenneth Gainwell, Tyler Algier, Khalil Herbert, Tyrion Davis-Price, that whole range. Find myself taking a lot of running backs in that group. I really like Spiller, really like Darrell Henderson. The cheaper ones, Algier's getting a little bit of buzz right now. Tyrion Davis-Price has gotten a little bit of buzz. I think we're going to be in a pretty good spot to go running back on the way back.
And when we look at round 12 values, Kenny Gainwell in the first half, Darrell Henderson in the second half, Algier and Tyrion Davis-Price late 13th. Marlon Mack, someone who I do think will bounce back from the Achilles and at least play enough to be an occasional roster guy in best ball late in the 14th. that's the general shape that we're seeing by ADP. Now we know that a lot of that does go out the window when you get into these double-digit rounds, and you do need to follow your rankings at least to an extent. Make sure you get players who fit with the build that you have going.
Absolutely. Ronald Jones still there. Get all the way to the turn on the other side. You projected a potential surprise Ronald Jones slide. Rashad White and Michael Carter went right after us. We saw Tyler Higbee, Tyler Boyd, Jahan Dotson, Justin Fields, Alberto Quigbanom all go. Naheem Hines and Darrell Henderson at the turn. 2 running backs that are not Ronald Jones. Then we get Kenny Golladay and Tim Patrick coming back. We are now 5 picks away. And Ronald Jones has been atop our queue for like 3 rounds. Yeah, one of the other things I want to say about that running back group is after about the Tyrion Davis price range, there are definitely some interesting backs. There always are. But I do think there's a bit of a drop-off when you start to see people take basically James Robinson. I think that's also an indication. They're like, okay, I'm willing to take James Robinson. Despite the health concerns and all of that, he tends to slot in right after that point. He actually just went off the board as I was looking at him in the queue. So he goes ahead of all of those backs in this particular draft. The Achilles is a tough one to come back from on such short terms. He was a December guy. And even if he is able to get back and be a little bit explosive for a period, I have a really hard time imagining him having a really long and productive season with 200 touches all within 12 months of that Achilles tear, which happened in December. But there have been some positive reports and people are getting on that train. Maybe I'll be wrong, but that's not a guy that I want to target here. I was going to say, once you get to him after the Tyrion Davis price and that group that I read off, it does feel like there's a pretty good tier break there from sort of the priority 0 RB targets to the more, I would say, pure flyers, if you will. Are you seeing that? You're the 0 RB target guy.
I think there's another tier break after those players that you mentioned. The other name that I had
Rondale Moore made it back.
So we get Rojo.
I mean, Ronald Jones. Yeah.
And that is very exciting. The other player who actually made it within 2 picks of us, who also had an 11th round ADP, and I had forgotten to mention a moment ago, Isaiah Spiller, someone who would have immense upside if anything happened to Austin Eckler.
Yep,
almost too bad that we don't get to choose between them, but obviously we are going to go Ronald Jones here.
Yeah, you would have tried to talk us into another non-Ronald Jones pick after.
Well, once we got to this point and the players in between have running back, you're almost like, well, let's just see. But there's no point to see how far he falls and not get him on your own team. The player who also has been near the top of the board for a while, and another player that I saw mentioned as a potential surprise cut, and I think a similar kind of dynamic to the one with Ronald Jones, is Alexander Madison. And based on sort of the background for Ty Chandler, I actually don't think it's impossible that Madison would be a surprise cut, even though that's not really what I'm predicting. I think that they will find other backs on their roster to get rid of. But that part and him falling is kind of frustrating here, Ben, because we just lost Kenneth Gainwell and Tyler Algier, which were the 2 guys I really were hoping would come back.
Yep, they would have been fun ones. Madison's still sitting here well after ADP. I'm totally fine taking him at this point. The alternative for me would be Tyrion Davis Price, who also sits as one of the next few running backs available. Is there any kind of correlation element here?
Well, one of the things is that the second string running back on a team that you have a number of players from actually pops in the Stack Explorers on the site, regardless of format. So that makes him a little bit interesting, especially with the reports that the 49ers are going to be very committee-based. We wouldn't necessarily need.
But isn't his
Davis
upside
Price.
Isn't his upside related to some goal line work? And isn't Lance's upside related to some rushing touchdowns? I mean, I hear that. I took Lance and Scott Fishbowl, thought about Tyrion Davis Price, decided to go another direction because I actually felt like, even though that might be a broad-based correlation, that this is a spot with Lance specifically where we want such rushing potential that it's very similar to what we would want from Tyrion Davis Price.
Well, I think on a full season basis, it causes a potential problem. I think on an individual game basis in best ball,
let's take him.
It actually could work to our advantage.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't want both of those guys in a redraft league where you've got to start your own lineup every week. I think that would be sort of a mini disaster in best ball, both for winning the full season and how that kind of balances out and raises your weekly floor, but then also for individual weeks at the end, especially because one of the things that we're looking to do here potentially would be to have Trey Lance get us through week 16 and then Lamar Jackson win us the whole tournament in week 17 when TDP goes off. And so from that perspective, I think that there are some real benefits to having these guys together.
And sorry to cut in as you were trying to make that case. I think that was a really strong case. I just wanted to make sure that you knew I agreed because we were at about 6 seconds on our clock. But I as soon as you said that, I was definitely on board, especially because Lance is not our number one, right? We don't need Lance to have every week upside. We talked about the 2 QBs that we have. Anytime Tyrion Davis-Price is doing that and maybe cutting into Lance's upside, that's fine because we have Lamar Jackson on our team as well. And more broadly, we have now made this pretty strong bet on San Francisco's offense, which is what the Sack Explorer is showing, in the big level is, sometimes when you just get the quarterback right, you get the receiver right, you get the running back right, you get the whole offense right. They just perform particularly well. I really like just piling them on and saying, hey, we're playing San Francisco to smash. I did think there were some unique elements there, but I think you hit that very, very well in terms of how that will play out in best ball, and especially for this roster with Lamar there. That's a nice fit.
The other player, Ben, that if we hadn't kind of gotten caught a little bit with looking at Gainwell and Algier, who went off right before us, and sort of emphasizing the running back position, which I think was the right call. If we had taken a running back in 11, which would have been Rojo, and then taken either Gainwell and Algier in 12, would you have been excited about Jarvis Landry, a player who we talked about kind of getting to the end of the tier of receivers we really want to draft, but Jarvis Landry is sort of an interesting player in round 13, given that he did immediately generate some very positive buzz once he went to New Orleans. But now that it looks like, I don't know, I mean, I get offers in Dynasty for Michael Thomas all the time, and I just don't think that there's very much value there, even for 2022. Does Jarvis Landry slide, though, if Michael Thomas is able to come out and practice in training camp?
Yeah, I would assume so. I don't know if he should. We should probably get a better price on him. I do like adding him to these types of builds. I'm kind of chewing on my thoughts here because I'm not really sure what to make of Michael Thomas. that's what it comes down to. I mean, the last time we saw him for a full season, it was a long, long time ago, but his last full season, he broke the NFL catches record. And I mean, yeah, he still had Drew Brees, but he looked like a guy who could just earn an obscene amount of volume. He had 149 catches. That was the 2019 season. He only plays 7 games in 2020. He doesn't play in 2021. I've been very much out on him. Keep hearing positive reports. He did get put on PUP, but people are talking about him moving well. I'm probably not going to end up drafting him anywhere. But you did just talk about how this offense is not expected to be very explosive. I still like Landry's price. I think the way that I would play the Saints passing game, to the extent that I'm going to play it at all, is Landry. Does he fall? I mean, I don't know. He's already so cheap. Where are you at on Marlon Mack? You've mentioned him to me a couple of times this offseason as the potential starter for the Texans. He seems to be rehabbing pretty well. I was looking for some quotes. Some of the stuff that I found suggested that, there was positive stuff about Mack, and then they were, I think it was Lovie Smith, right, as the coach for the Texans now. He was quick to say, we like him. We also like all the other running backs we have. We think it's a really good group. They're basically emphasizing that they intend to use multiple backs. You would think that Dameon Pierce would be the one that would gain work across the season. I think Rex Burkhead's probably going to play a decent amount on passing downs.
I mean, yeah, when you have Rex Burkhead, you've got a good running back room, so I don't think Lovey is exaggerating there at all.
I mean, he's somebody that didn't even go in my Scott Fish Bowl to bring that back up. But 22nd round, I was looking at him a little bit. It's like, I could take him, but Will Fuller was still there. I mean, had to take Will Fuller. Do you think Marlon Mack's an interesting addition to zero RB builds in the sense that, his best case scenario is he's kind of a lead back. He's getting 10 to 15 touches, and he provides a little bit of a floor element, not in a good offense or anything, but a little bit of a floor element. If he is all the way back now, 2 years removed from the Achilles, that is something you've mentioned to consider with the Achilles, is that we do sometimes see these guys more explosive that second year back.
Yeah, and really after you get outside that sort of 18-month zone, one of the things that the Texans have emphasized that he looks like Marlon Mack of old, and the Marlon Mack of old was good. I mean, even last year, because of that, the Colts were trying to showcase him a little bit. And I mean, when you're not back to full explosiveness, you don't want to be showcased right next to Jonathan Taylor. No one's going to trade for you in that situation. You're not going to look good. But Marlon Mack was a very good player. One of the reasons why we tend to target the backup rookies is that as they go throughout the course of the season, they do tend to take over, especially if they're good. I don't know that Dameon Pierce is good enough, but also we have sort of a price flip in this situation where you're actually getting the guy who's going to, in all likelihood, start. I mean, it's not guaranteed. If Pierce does come out and look great in the preseason, he will take that job. So you've got a couple of things kind of counterbalancing each other at this spot.
We are on the clock. We're running down a little bit. I will say Landry is the guy by ADP at the top of the queue. We could use an 8th receiver still pretty comfortably, I think. I'm very comfortable going there if you want to get Landry.
Let's take Jarvis Landry. I do think that that's a little bit of a unique opportunity at the 1409. One of the things it does do a little bit would be to eliminate someone like a George Pickens, who faces off against the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson in week 17. But again, I don't know that we're necessarily playing it that way. We're kind of playing a Baltimore bloodbath in that final game of the season.
Yeah, because of our Jackson Dobbins stack, right? We're just saying they're going to score a ton of touchdowns. Dobbins is going to run late. He's going to run early. Jackson's going to run and throw, and they're going to both have 30-point games.
So we now have Ronald Jones and J.K. Dobbins, which really is all that you need at the running back position, Ben. But we do have 3 players total there. We also need to add some additional tight ends. I guess I would be targeting the 16-17 range to try and pull off the McBride Dulcich double. But with those players getting a little bit buzzier, there's no guarantee that will work. Now, even in the last week, their ADPs are in the 18th and 19th round. So, we probably don't want to jump the gun there. But structurally, it is running back and tight end that we're looking at as we go down the stretch of these last 6 picks.
Yeah, I think we're good with our 8 receivers. We're good with our 2 quarterbacks. As we scroll through our roster here for the YouTube listeners, we do only have the 1 tight end, Kyle Pitts. We only have 3 running backs, Dobbins, Jones, and Tyrion Davis-Price. We have 6 picks left to work with. Talking about getting to the 3 tight end build, that would leave us 7 total running backs with the 8 receivers. I think that's a pretty good balance given how receiver heavy we were early. So that's probably it for us, is 4 more backs, 2 more tight ends. I like the idea of waiting. We've talked about how some of these tight ends in the later rounds are some of the more intriguing ones. Those 2 rookies you mentioned, I've liked Jonnu Smith most of the offseason. There's still some other names that are there to provide some cover. Cameron Braid is floating around now that the Bucs have added Kyle Rudolph. He's likely to fall, but Brevin Jordan is there. Logan Thomas is there if he were to get healthy. Taysom Hill is there, who people like to take. There are some draftable tight ends left. Not a ton after those rookies go, though. I like the idea of potentially taking our running back 4 here, going tight end 16, 17, and then grabbing 3 flyer running backs, which we always know we'll find some running back that we're willing to take in rounds 18, 19, and 20.
We definitely will. The question here is, kind of how to play it out by ADP. It might even be something where we do want to wait on Dulcich. The cost here, just because we have obviously a limit of roster spots, and then probably rounds 19 and 20 are not going to be as fun. But there are quite a few names to like in this range. Chris Evans, Hassan Haskins, Sony Michel, Benjamin, I think is almost a must draft. Jarrett McKinnon, even with Rojo, I think. Dearness Johnson, those guys all going in the top 18 rounds. And so it does put a little bit of the question back to us of, do we actually definitively prefer Marlon Mack? Now, Marlon Mack has an ADP multiple rounds ahead of those guys. He's the 1410. We're back around here to the 1504. I mean, obviously, we're not going to make a huge deal of the ADP value in this range of the draft, but it is something where, he is the top player available by ADP, actually number 2 behind KJ Osborne.
I'm in no way going to argue breaching on a running back in the 15th round to get a guy that you prefer to Marlon Mack. Who do you like?
The thing I definitely want to do is get which might change our tight end approach slightly if we go Mack here. I don't think that necessarily makes sense to go here. Let's go Mack.
Let's just take here. I've seen him rise a little bit these last couple of weeks. I've seen him go in the 15-16 range.
Well, we're going to take Benjamin because we think that he is the clear lead
He's
winner.
a guy we have to have with our Atlanta double. We have Rondale Moore and now for Arizona for week 17. Marlon Mack goes 1 pick later. That's fine.
And one of the things you've been mentioning, one of the reasons why he is rising, he is somebody that we've been on from really multiple years ago, and that has been incorrect. But also early on in this offseason. What are you talking about?
He's been a great mascot on all my teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's good fortune, even if he doesn't score any points. But they have been talking about him as a potential breakout star. And some of that is obviously going to be a puff piece type of coverage in the early offseason. But I think with the addition of Keontae Ingram, with the signing of Darrell Williams, people are like, okay, well, the Cardinals are finally done with Benjamin. They're trying to make sure that they have some other paths. And in fact, at least the rhetoric coming out of Arizona is that that's not the case. You have to have some running backs, right? I mean, you look at what the teams like the Patriots and the Raiders and, to a lesser extent, maybe the 49ers, some of those teams are doing to make sure they load up on running back options. You listen to Cliff Kingsbury, I should say, the actual coach of the Arizona Cardinals, and he has said that Benjamin finally looks like the guy there. Starting guard Justin Pugh has said that really Benjamin has been the best outside zone runner on the team for a while. And now his pass protection has come along to where they can actually play him.
All right, we already took him in the 15th round. Let's chill. We want to get him in the 15th a few more times.
Well, Ben, he does.
We don't need him going in the 12th.
He does have a much later ADP. His ADP is in the early 18th. I don't think that we're just kind of explaining why we would go with him early here.
A lot of people tune into this show to find out who Shawn Siegele's 0 RB targets might be this year.
Well, you have to have Benjamin, and then we'll play this back after.
The good thing is our most loyal listeners took Benjamin last year and are probably fast forwarding through this segment. So I don't think there's going to be this big rush to draft him. Everyone's a little bit snake bitten. You got to be a true believer, I think.
Well, we're going to listen back to this after we win the $200,000, and it's going to be a thing where we just nailed every pick except for Benjamin, and people are going to be like, it really is a miracle that their team was still competitive, because what were they thinking that Shawn was having them select Benjamin? For the record, I had Marlon Mack 3/4 of the way clicked down when Ben's like, no, let's get here. So,
and I'm glad we did. Don't you feel better about that? Let's draft the players we like.
Yeah, well, that's why Trey McBride is in our sights here. Marlon Mack was the very next pick after Benjamin. Then we got Joshua Palmer, Logan Thomas, Gus Edwards, Nico Collins, KJ Osborne, Raheem Mostert, and Mark Ingram. We're in the 15th round, and so those are some of the types of players that are going to go. I probably would have that stretch more as 20th round guys. So pushing down players that we're targeting, again, that doesn't mean that we're going to be right. It just means that we do like that those players are off the board since they weren't on our target list. Right. But I do have John.
And one of the big things, sorry to cut in, but one of the big things when you get into this range of drafts, and one of the reasons I'm so comfortable with it, is you only get so many picks. Our constraint now is we only have 5 more picks after taking, we only had 6 at that point. We have to make this running back room work. We started, who's our number 1 running back? I already forgot. We started with J.K. Dobbins. We took Ronald Jones. We took Tyrion Davis-Price. If Benjamin is the best shot to continue to build out this running back room, even if we take 4 guys with 18th round ADPs, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, okay, fine. You want to reach for but you also prefer Chris Evans, and I do too. We also like, Jerick McKinnon as a potential option. You mentioned D'Ernest Johnson, some of those guys. If we get 4 guys with 18th round ADPs in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and that's how we think our running back room will look best at the end of this draft. Again, our constraint is the picks that we have. Using a pick on Marlon Mack, who I do think is an interesting option for a kind of floor play, and Chris Evans does go, so we didn't get Chris Evans back to us. And that's the point, is like, you can't take both of those guys in the 16th. We're talking about taking tight ends in the 16th as well. Make sure that you're using those spots, those draft opportunities. You can't take 2 dudes in the 16th that you're pushing down the line. Maybe we would wind up losing McBride. Maybe we would wind up losing Dulcich. Just get the players that you want to get towards the end of the draft that build out your roster the way you want. Because at this point, the constraint, again, is the draft slots. It is nice to try to hit the home run, right? And if we could still get later and then have Mac, that would be great. But Mac's a floor play. He's in a bad offense. They're probably going to be in a committee. Not having him in our running back build is not a concern.
And when you mentioned the upside there and Mac being more of a floor play, when you think about the points, both in terms of individual games and then multi-game stretches that players like Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds and James Conner have scored in the Arizona offense. And it's not to criticize them, but probably none of those guys are stars, right? I mean, I like Chase Edmonds. I think he's a good pick this year. Obviously, we like James Conner. Kenyon Drake has had his moments, but it's not like you're talking about, obviously a Jonathan Taylor, but even a guy who will be drafted 2nd round, 3rd round. I mean, James Conner did go 2nd round in this draft, but the ability of the offense to also elevate these guys, if we believe in the talent level of an Benjamin, we want to make sure that we have that. It's probably even more important given how weak we really are at the position. I don't know, Ben. John is going to come back to us to here. That's not a surprise. He's got an 18th round ADP. He does maybe factor in, but we're all set to make this tight end splurge. Is there a running back here that you want to go with first and try and get 17, 18 from McBride and Dulcich instead?
I mean, I think it would be McKinnon, but we do have Rojo. So in this particular build, I'm not as concerned about grabbing him. You have Hassan Haskins, Brian Robinson, Sony Michel, D'Ernest Johnson all in the queue. I like Haskin and Robinson as well as rookies that are good late picks. But I was going to say McBride here and then potentially Jonnu on the way back. The teams behind us have 2, 2, and 3 tight ends already. One of the 2s was an early build, Hawkinson, Goddard. The other is a late build. They might add a 3rd. I wouldn't expect a ton of tight ends behind us. If you want to go tight end running back, we can maybe go running back first, sort of playing the room. I was thinking McBride was the one that we were going to try to make sure to lock up. If you want to go Jonnu, we certainly could. I'm comfortable either way.
Let's go Trey McBride. We want to have last year's superstar rookie tight end and the new megastar, the number 6 overall player in fantasy football, Kyle Pitts, going up against this year's breakout rookie tight end, Trey McBride.
This is super fun because we don't have the big name Arizona guys, but we wound up in a Pitts London build correlating with 3 guys that we think could work into bigger roles in Arizona. By the time this week 17 game comes around, we got all of them. Rondale Moore, Benjamin, Trey McBride. We like all of them. If none of them is playing in week 17, I'm going to be mad. But on this team, especially, we might have 2 of them or all 3 of them as part of the offense by that point going up against Pitts in London. It could be a really fun shootout for us there.
It could be. And I love those players. And I think that there's also an early season element for us with DeAndre Hopkins being suspended. I don't have any insider info at all on this, obviously, But I just do think that Trey McBride is going to be one of the guys that they use in some unique ways to kind of get across that gap. Now, Hassan Haskins does go. He was the guy I was probably the most interested in if we were going to take a running back here. They've been high on him in Tennessee, and he's been blown away, which is kind of fun to read. You have these rookies meeting some of these stars and talking about how just gigantic Derrick Henry is and like how fast he also is. Can't believe how fast he is at the size. But Derrick Henry has thrown a lot of compliments back his own way, not necessarily for the speed, but for the overall back that Haskins is. I like that one because he would probably be the guy in this Washington situation. I don't know that
20 seconds on the clock.
I don't know that Brian Robinson is even the guy if Antonio Gibson gets hurt. Dulcich or
McKinnon?
I mean, let's just take Dulcich.
Okay.
We gotta have the 3 tight ends. We want that upside.
I like it a
this
lot.
is early for Dulcich, but he can go anywhere. I mean, I'm not sure what.
That was a classic Shawn on the clock, though, moment where you talked about Hassan Haskins for 40 seconds of our clock, and we had 20 seconds left, and you were talking about the player that went before us.
Well, yeah, because it more or less dictated that we could take Dulcich, and so that's what I was.
You were just running the clock down, and then Dulcich it was. I'm very comfortable with the 16-17 turn. That's why we took Eno at 15. Exactly what I was saying. Eno might have an 18th round ADP. He's been rising a little bit. Almost certainly, in my opinion, would not have gotten all the way back to 1809. If there was any possibility we're going to go McBride Dulcich. If we had taken Mac there, then maybe we end up losing one of those. Now we wind up with 3 guys. Yeah, they all have a little bit later ADPs than where we took them, but we wouldn't have otherwise got them all on our team. So they're the guys we want. I'm very excited about this. Dulcich is getting a lot of positive reviews. You mentioned when we were in the Albert Wugbanom range.
They're mostly from Patrick Corain. I mean, he's single-handedly trying to.
I think he's paying off beat reporters at this point.
Well, he's trying to ruin this fantastic opportunity we have to take Dulcich in the 20th round. If it were not for Pat, I would say Dulcich 20th, and then we win the whole thing. So, I mean, Pat is so good at Twitter that I get reports on all of his jokes from Column. Obviously, we love Pat. I mentioned him in a big way in my recent Dynasty article, 6 Lessons in 1. It was looking at a team that I drafted with Pat and contrasting that with the team that I drafted with Matt Jones, another really cool fantasy writer and someone who's doing a little bit of work for RotoViz. But Pat also has some great Dynasty research that I reference in that piece. Yeah, so, I mean, Pat is the greatest, and that's one of the reasons why I'm now on the Dulcich bandwagon to an extent, and partly trying to balance out some of my Albert O exposures. It's also the reason that I don't have a lot of Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, because how can those guys score any points if Albert O and Greg Dulcich are going to be like the 3 and 4 overall tight ends this season?
Wait, I was looking away. Did you just say Albert O and Dulcich are going to be the tight end 3 and tight end 4 in the same offense?
Well, this is the new Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez situation,
okay.
I think.
Got it.
I mean, some people want to say
that. I was concerned that I misheard it. It would have fit with, your typical 17th round hot takes that you like to throw into the end of our drafts.
There needs to be a reason to listen to round 17, 18, 19, and 20.
Shawn starts getting a little loose, starts talking about Alberto and Dulcich both finishing as top 5 tight ends. At least one of these throughout this offseason, random predictions you've thrown into these end of show notes will come true. Probably multiple. I'm going to bet against that one. That one feels like 1,000 to 1 odds type of bet.
But again, no, I mean, obviously that's not going to happen. But I mean, Albert O was very, very good. If the Broncos legitimately think that they've got a guy who is as good or better, I mean, those guys should be dominating defenses this year.
So fade Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, even KJ Hamler. You heard it here straight from Shawn's mouth. This is a tight end only offense. Also Javonte Williams, fade him. Russell Wilson, 20.
I mean, Russell Wilson is known for just peppering his tight ends with targets, right?
Yeah, exactly. Touchdowns at least. 30 touchdowns, 15 to Dulcich, 15 to Okwuegbunam. No one else catches a TD.
We do need to check here. And just, if nothing else, for good luck, we need to get David Bell and KJ Hamler into the queue. But our big problem is that we now have, we do have Ernest Johnson still there. I was going to say, we don't have any running backs in the queue and we need more other running backs. Ben, you had made the case, and I was kind of joking with you about this. I've always loved Matt Breida. When teams have given him a chance in the last couple of years, they quickly decided, wait, that was a mistake. And yet,
there's no one else on there.
You know that you are a big-time NFL fan if you can name the players on the Giants roster behind Saquon Barkley.
It's Matt Breida. It's Gary Brightwell. It's UDFA Jashawn Corbin, who I've seen drafted. Other people looking at the depth chart and saying, I'm going to take the rookie. Antonio Williams. Sandro Platzgummer. That's their running back room.
Well, I'm on board with Platzgummer. I'm not on board with James White, who you put in the queue and is still completely injured.
Yeah, but if you get him in like the 20th round now, what if he plays? Is it immediate? I mean, like, is there no possibility that he plays? Say it's a 20% possibility. That's an immediate hit. All right, fine. You're putting Kyron Williams in there. He's in a walking boot. Talk to me about injured players.
Yeah, but he isn't like the 17th guy on the depth chart on his team.
What? James White has a clear role. The guy's caught like 900 balls every time he's ever been healthy. Disagree. Grumble.
Then we do some more running backs. I was mentioning to you that they do run out in the 19th and 20th rounds. Rex Burkhead, though, our guy, still potentially available here.
I was sure you're going to like the James White price, but you're just confident he's not going to play?
Well, in all seriousness, all of the reports that I have read suggest that
he can't even walk.
Yeah, that he's in danger of missing the season. Now, again, I could be misinformed there. It seems like there was more news today, obviously, on PUP. That doesn't mean, all that means is you can't play the first practice, I believe. But he's someone where I do think that the PR Strong pick was specifically because they don't think that he's going to be ready.
Didn't Strong not have much receiving in his background?
Well, that's the thing that I don't understand is that no, he didn't necessarily, but he's been getting a lot of buzz in that
way.
Right. During off-season
That's interesting.
activities.
Yeah.
He's got the great speed. And when you have a guy about his size with great speed, you tend to think, okay, well, this player would be excellent in space. Why don't we do that? Obviously, all you have to do is look at someone like Ronald Jones, someone who 205, 208, somewhere in that range, great speed, and yet receiving is obviously not his thing.
Yeah. My thing on White is still just, and Pierre Strong goes one pick before us, but it's still just that he, caught 12 balls in his 3 games last year. And as soon as he went down, they gave Brandon Bolden the job. They didn't give it to Stevenson. Everyone, got excited about Stevenson when the reports on White came out. But I think it would be, a very positive thing for Stevenson, but not what we saw last year, certainly with Brandon Bolden keeping him, out of that third down role. What are you thinking here? D'Ernest Johnson?
That seems like the way to go. He
Yeah.
is the pick by ADP. And there is this, you hear a bunch of trade rumors with the Cleveland Browns running backs. I don't know how reasonable those are, but certainly if you went from 3 to 2, that'd be a very good situation. D'Ernest Johnson has had fantastic peripherals the last couple seasons. You have to draft good players in the 18th round. And obviously you're not ignoring opportunity completely, but there are some big gaps still in terms of talent levels with the players who are left, which is one of the reasons why you've been mentioning James White. If James White were 100% healthy, it would be the clearest no-brainer in the draft at this point.
Yeah, I like what you just said there, though, because I do think people get way too caught with trying to predict where the opportunity is going to arise. And maybe I was doing this a little bit with Marlon Mack, but we think Marlon Mack, if he's back to his old self, could probably be a pretty good player too. But you predict that, and you don't think about what happens if that opportunity does arise, because we do actually see opportunities arise for backs that are then not good, and then some other random, free agent signing comes in and winds up being the running back who's actually playing for that team, right? And so, just grabbing a guy late because you're like, oh, no, sort of the Matt Breida point. There's no one else on the depth chart. Well, I actually think if Saquon goes down again, they're definitely adding someone. right? They're bringing back Devontae Booker. They're bringing in who's still a free agent, different coaching staff who had him last year. And this coaching staff doesn't necessarily seem interested in bringing him in, but they're bringing in someone to complement Breida. I don't think Breida suddenly is a 20 carry back or a 70% snap back or whatever you want to call it. He's probably playing 40% of the snaps, and some other off the street free agent is playing 40% of the snaps.
Exactly. And that's kind of my concern there, is just it doesn't really seem like there's any way that could work out. Even though Breida, someone who does have or has had the elite athleticism to make plays, and you're looking at guys who you think can make plays in this range. Tyler Badie, someone who is vaguely interesting with his background and would perhaps be able to cross some of the chasm there if Dobbins isn't ready at the very beginning. I think.
What do you think about Jeff Wilson with our Tyrion Davis-Price pick, continuing to play into our Lance Ayuk, San Francisco bet that, they're going to rotate backs a little bit?
I like that. And I don't think that you necessarily know, again, which game you're going to need. If it's the week 17 game,
maybe we can get him in the 20th.
That's all the marbles. I was thinking 20th for him. I was thinking potential 20th for Badie. One of the things I think we have to consider here, that would get us to 6. Are we willing to go ahead and just say, look, let's take a Will Fuller here because he's so clearly the best player available, or even a David Bell?
There's enough receivers left. Hamler's still left as well that I think I'd rather kick that can to the 20th. Take your best running back here.
Okay, so we'll take Jeff Wilson. He has been mentioned in reports as looking much better this year in the offseason than he did last year, where he had some injury issues. They tried to play him a little bit in 2021 and just did not have the pop that he'd had in some previous campaigns. It does look like that will be the 3-back committee with Trey Sermon on the outside looking in. And they've, again, made noise about limiting Elijah Mitchell, which I think is kind of unfortunate because he has the explosiveness to be the star there. But one of the things, and again, maybe the Brandon Ayuk pick will be the one that we look back on and have a little bit of regret about, considering how we actually want the season to play out for Trey Lance and the running backs. But I think that the San Francisco offense, regardless of exactly how it manifests, is going to score a lot of points. It's a good fit with the rest of the team that we have built here.
Yeah, and part of the reason I was excited to go running back there, you look back at our whole roster. We started with Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Jaylen Waddle at the top of our receiver group. We get Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Skyy Moore, Rondale Moore, Jarvis Landry. It's somewhat unfortunate that this is the draft where KJ Hamler and Will Fuller and David Bell are just not getting picked in the 18th round. But I don't know that we have to add to that receiving room. And then especially with some health concerns with Dobbins as our number one running back, with now some cut concerns that we're not actually taking seriously on Ronald Jones, but we have to consider, probably at least to some degree, Benjamin, we love. Dearness Johnson, we love, but they might be more like number 3 backs. Tyrion Davis-Price, similar situation. Kind of concerned that this running back room at times could be taking zeros. And so I do feel like this is a 6 running back build. And to get Jeff Wilson with Tyrion Davis-Price, one of the reasons I liked that thought was just the raising of the floor. I do think whatever order they're in, they're very likely to be the number 2 and number 3 backs ahead of Sermon. Based on what we saw from Sermon last year, maybe that will prove to be wrong. But they do really like Jeff Wilson, and they go and they draft Tyrion Davis-Price this offseason. That's sort of the most recent data point we have in the same round that they took Sermon in. Tyrion Davis-Price could get the Sermon treatment as well, but probably that would mean Jeff Wilson is then the number 2, which has sort of been the latest reports that Wilson's probably still the number 2. But providing a little bit of floor, I think, to our running back room wasn't a bad thing to get a couple different San Francisco running backs. Ideally, as long as, one of them is healthy. I don't see a lot of scenarios where there's weeks where neither of them is getting at least like 5 touches. This team might actually need at times the running back to just get 5 touches. And it might be so good, frankly, at quarterback with Lamar Jackson and Trey Lance. And if Kyle Pitts is what we want, and with Trey McBride and Dulcich at tight end and at wide receiver with those names that I mentioned, that we might only need 8 to 10 points at running back at times. That's sort of the way that we, sometimes we'll think about zero RB teams. And this is a zero RB team that I think has executed the potential to have a lot of upside at receiver, a lot of upside at quarterback, especially. Maybe you can quibble with our tight end upside a little, but obviously it has Kyle Pitts. And we were sitting talking at the start of the show about how he might be the most important player in drafts this year. We only pair him with 2 rookies very late, Trey McBride and Dulcich. But if Pitts is that, then our tight ends will be fine. That's sort of where I'm at. I think this is I guess we're now at 6 running backs. I think it's a 7 running back build. I did my math a little wrong, but David Bell goes. Will Fuller still sits. KJ Hamler still sits. It's really hard to take like Rex Burkhead over those guys.
Well, let me make a different pitch to you then. And implicit in everything that you were saying is that what we want from these picks are guys who could win us the tournament, that both help with the weekly floor as we go along, and then the tournament upside when we're into the big money stage. I mean, Jeff Wilson has already shown that he can score in the 20s, have that monster game. That's the kind of player that you need. Another player here, and frankly, I kind of wish that I had pushed for him in the 19th round, kind of thinking this all the way through. Tyler Badie is kind of one of the stealth prospects from this most recent draft. The Ravens really liked him. He does have some similarities with J.K. Dobbins to where he could cover that, but also just a back that you can play and use and can be in this run-heavy Ravens juggernaut. Tyler Badie, because J.K. Dobbins is the star, all of the focus on him being ready is, where the coverage is going to go. But there's also concern with Gus Edwards, and Gus Edwards can't lose a little bit of his talent level and still be an impact player, where I think that J.K. Dobbins probably could, right? If Dobbins is 90% over the first half of the season, that's still going to be something. With Gus Edwards, as probably not. Tyler Badie, my 20th round prediction is simply that Tyler Badie is going to outscore Gus Edwards this year. And if that's the case, then again, I think that you have to believe he's a good fit for what we've done and that he has week 17 upside.
Well, I can't argue with that. So let's take it. Classic Shawn, run the clock down to 20 seconds, giving me no choices. Well played.
You have Hamler, you have Burkhead, you have Laviska Shenault. It was the perfect chance. I mean, 15 seconds is what you need for Laviska Shenault, right? So.
Yeah, I could have made a Laviska pitch in 15 seconds, no problem. Will Fuller did go 1 pick before us, so we didn't get that option. I didn't have any alternatives. The second you started talking about Badie, I was like, sure, let's do it. I wasn't actually thinking when you mentioned him in the 19th about how we have Dobbins and Lamar. Don't really like the handcuff element, right? But in terms of where we did it in 2 running back rooms that are likely to be very very run heavy. In fact, there are the 2 teams that in my projections will project to have the heaviest run lean and not close. The Ravens typically do, just because even though I have them calling more pass plays than I would have based on 2021, you have Lamar's scramble rate very high. They just end up as a run leaning team. And then San Francisco is already a run heavy team. They call a lot of run plays, and Trey Lance is going to have a pretty heavy scramble rate himself. These 2 teams are going to come out sort of in a projection perspective, very run heavy, just, for that reason, because their quarterbacks are going to scramble as well and all those things. But we're talking about the running backs here, but they're also 2 teams that like to shuffle their running backs a little bit. Even when Dobbins is at his absolute best, they're using other backs to spell him some, or that was the case in 2020 in his rookie season. We certainly know that's the case in San Francisco, how they kind of see different roles, a speed back role, a power back role. Again, these are handcuffs, but they're sort of, making the case that they're running back by committee pieces and run heavy offenses where it makes some sense. And it's a build where, again, we feel like we're strong at all the other positions. And now it provides potentially some floor at the running back position. So let's look at our whole team now that we're done. We started Justin Jefferson at the 104, Kyle Pitts in the late second, A.J. Brown, Jaylen Waddle, J.K. Dobbins, Lamar Jackson, Drake London, Trey Lance, Brandon Ayuk, Skyy Moore, Rondale Moore, Ronald Jones, Tyrion Davis-Price, Jarvis Landry, Eno Benjamin, Trey McBride, Greg Dulcich, Dearness Johnson, Jeff Wilson, Tyler Badie. Both of our quarterbacks double stacked at the running back position. We also have, Brandon Ayuk stacked in there on the San Francisco side. Big bets on Baltimore and San Francisco. It's a pretty fun team.
I like it a lot. I think that the one place where if we had to do it again, we might make a different choice would be that round 14 selection of Jarvis Landry, knowing some of the picks that you have at wide receiver in 19 and 20 contrasted with some of the running backs there. We say that he'll probably be the guy who wins the league for us. Then if we had wanted to put the Marlon Mack selection in there instead of Jarvis Landry, there's just such a big gap for me in terms of the quality of those two players. Or not the quality, I shouldn't say that, because like I've said, I'm a big Marlon Mack fan, but the combination of the track record and, say, the positional value for Jarvis Landry does trump somebody who hasn't been able to perform as well recently, is coming off of the injury, is now on a very low-scoring team. Maybe there's a different player we would consider there, but one of the reasons why we took Landry as opposed to going receiver is that the next three running backs drafted after we selected Jarvis Landry were Darrell Williams, Deontay Foreman, and Jamal Williams. That's not to say that any of those guys absolutely couldn't have an impact, but I think that those players are very similar to the players that we drafted in rounds 19 and 20. Jamal Williams, a good player, but the situation there in terms of the value of his touches, likely with the Lions, very, very low. Deontay Foreman, a handcuff for Christian McCaffrey. We talk about the differences between taking those guys in 19 and 20 and kind of what that does for us structurally and how the price factors in. It's very different than a more of a true handcuff type of situation where you have Foreman behind McCaffrey. This is not necessarily a handcuff situation, but that same team has gone with Ken Walker and Rashad Penny. I like both of those guys. I think it could work out to an extent, but it doesn't really work for you if you take those players in rounds 8 and 9. So when you're using the Stack Explorer, when you're kind of thinking through either handcuff or no handcuff, context does matter a lot. And you explained that kind of as you were going through. One of the things that I like about our team here is that I do think that the vast majority of our players are in offenses that I expect to score a lot of points. And if you can get those players without sort of overpaying for the fact that they're in a good offense, then I think that you've kind of skewed your upside to the positive side of things. And we talk a lot, and you had a really cool article about contingency-based drafting. Anybody who is listening right now and hasn't subscribed to Stealing Signals, make sure that you get over there. Get that piece. If you're a subscriber and missed it, check that out. When we're looking at scenarios and trying to understand the different scenarios and pricing scenarios, obviously we're going to benefit if the teams that we've drafted these players on just overall are explosive offenses.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and I think that is a big positive here. If I was going to say a negative, I would say that we stacked Baltimore and San Francisco so heavily and didn't get a single player from their Week 17 opponents, the Raiders and the Steelers. You talked about potentially taking Pickens. I do like the point you made during the draft that the way that we're sort of playing these offenses between, these running quarterbacks and multiple running backs on their offenses, we're sort of playing for game scenarios where these teams win by a lot. And we know both teams they can really take it to their opponent on the ground. But to really rack up the rush attempts and the rushing volume, what you need is the opponent to have short drives. And then your team is running the ball late, right? Obviously, if you're having a massive blowout, the players can get pulled. The starting quarterbacks can get pulled, things like that. But you want the play discrepancy is the big thing that I would say between the Niners and their opponent, or between the Ravens and their opponent, to be pretty large, for them to be putting together these big, long rush heavy drives, frankly, in this type of a build, I think. So I don't think it's that crazy that we don't have the bringbacks, even though they are pretty hefty stacks. In any scenario where these teams do win by a lot, you're talking about scenarios that are playing well for these rosters. Their quarterbacks are probably helping them get the leads, and these running backs are probably cycling in, particularly some of the ones we took late. Jeff Wilson, Tyler Badie are probably cycling in some, potentially getting late touchdowns, those types of elements. So in terms of, the week 17 correlation stuff, obviously, when games shoot out and they're back and forth late and there's a lot of possessions and there's a lot of scoring and maybe there's overtime, that's amazing for fantasy. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're looking for. If you're going to go away from it, or if there's a point where you don't necessarily need to prioritize it, I think the ways that we've sort of uniquely built these two team stacks probably fit that and save us from a little bit of criticism there.
Yeah, I would be much more concerned about not having the Raiders, not having the Steelers, and those are teams that I do like to play a lot in best ball. And I think that cluster of teams, with Baltimore, with San Francisco, are a lot of fun. You can do some cool things there. If we had Bateman on the team, if we had spent an early pick at receiver for the 49ers with either Debo or Kittle, I think it would be a lot bigger deal. One of the things that I do like, and one of the sort of mild points of emphasis that we didn't talk about a lot during the show, is that Baltimore plays Atlanta in week 16. Obviously, we've got a couple of those Atlanta pieces. I think through how the tournament played out last season, and every week really wanting to get through, and whether or not it would happen, and when you felt like you were going to go from, okay, this is cool, but anything could happen, to where, okay, now it seems like the chance to win the whole thing is there. I mean, that's when you go from week 16 to week 17. And so there are a lot of important ways in which the week 16 matchup is the one that you do want to also really focus on. And I think that having that Atlanta-Baltimore week 16 matchup, and then Atlanta-Arizona in week 17, again, I think that you can end up giving away value by focusing on this kind of thing too much, but I do like that for this team, where I think if we have Kyle Pitts, if we have Drake London, and those guys are having the kind of seasons that we want, they could be a big part of, number one, being involved in a shootout game that gets us to the finals, and then number two, hopefully shooting out again in week 17 and being a big part, along with those quarterbacks, of potentially winning that $200,000.
I love it. That makes a lot of sense. That I hadn't really been thinking through that Atlanta-Baltimore week 16 game, but that is very fun with London and Pitts there on that roster. That could be a big part of us advancing to the week 17 final.